Good morning, Your Honor. Ben Beasley on behalf of the defendant, co-counsel.
Ryan Warren, W-A-L-G-U-R-N, on behalf of John Draft.
Your Honor, Breon Johnson on behalf of the state.
Along with Phil Corrigan, that's C-O-R-R-I-G-A.
Your Honor, the state has a few housekeeping matters preliminarily. No motions to eliminate. First, we would ask for constructive sequestration of the witnesses.
Okay. Any witnesses that will be testifying in this case, please step out of the courtroom and do not discuss the case with anybody else outside the courtroom.
Your Honor, we ask for constructive swearing in of all witnesses. Constructive sidebars. Constructive sidebars, Your Honor.
Okay.
Freedom to use the well of the court.
Pardon?
Freedom to use the well of the court.
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor. In addition, we'd also like to take notice that the defendant is constructively seated at the table with the defense counsel.
Okay.
For our final preliminary matter, Your Honor, we'd like to give you a stipulated copy, true copy of the record between the parties.
Okay.
Thank you.
Proceed.
We have no further matters at this point in time.
I have one preliminary matter, and that's asking your preferences to approaching witnesses and approaching the bench.
I run a free courtroom, so you can approach me or the witness if you prefer.
Yes, sir.
Any further?
State's ready to proceed over. Statement, Your Honor.
Any further, gentlemen?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, proceed.
Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a young daughter, an enraged father, and a loaded gun. The evidence today is going to show that John Draft became upset when he saw Stephen Walker talking to his daughter Sally Draft. So he went home, got his gun, and shot Stephen Walker dead in his own apartment, and cut his life short at 22 years old. My name is Phil Corrigan. Along with Breon Johnson, I represent the state of Lone Star. On May 13, 2011, Stephen Walker went to the mall to meet his girlfriend, Sally Draft, and his focus was completely on her. He was infatuated. But what he didn't know is at that very moment, the defendant was turning his focus to Stephen Walker. He was becoming upset at seeing the two of them together. And the evidence will show that he went home upset about what he had seen at the mall, and he got onto his daughter's online accounts. He saw messages that he thought were between Stephen Walker and his daughter. And he became even more angry. And the evidence will show that when he saw that, he decided that then and there that he was going to kill Stephen Walker. The next time anybody saw Stephen Walker was in the early morning hours of May 14, 2011, when police showed up to his apartment and found him on the floor, stripped to the waist, shot 3 times, 2 times in the chest and once in the head, left to die alone in a pool of his own blood. You'll hear from the DA's investigator, Dusty Stockard, who showed up at the scene and conducted the investigation. And what Mr. Stockard will explain to you is how he checked the scene first. And he found a shell casing next to the body. After he found that, he continued to search the apartment, and he went into the only bedroom in the apartment. He got onto the computer there. And on that computer, he saw computer messages back and forth between Stephen Walker and Sally Draft. And because Mr. Stockard knew the Draft family, he saw those messages and he called John Draft to continue the investigation and ask how old his daughter was. And when he called Mr. Draft, he told him, "I'm here at Stephen Walker's apartment, standing over his dead body." And the first thing that Mr. Draft told him, "I didn't do that." Ladies and gentlemen, after Dusty Stockard finished up at Stephen Walker's apartment, later on, he went over to speak with the defendant and to check out his apartment. And the evidence will show that he later obtained a search warrant and he searched that apartment. Inside the apartment, found a receipt for ammunition. Found a map showing the location, showing the distance and the route between the defendant's apartment and Mr. Walker's apartment. And then, after he had found all of that, he searched the defendant's body. And he found in the defendant's pocket a shell casing. And Dusty Stockard is going to tell you that based on his observation, he couldn't tell the difference between the two shell casings. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll also meet some doctors today. And the reason for that is that the defendant has entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. So you're going to hear from psychiatrists, at least one and maybe two. You'll hear from Dr. Chris Ciccone, who conducted interviews with the defendant, who reviewed his MMPI psychological questionnaire results, and who reviewed all of the police file in this case. Dr. Ciccone is going to tell you that when she looked at the results for the MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, she became concerned because the results suggested possible error in the test, or perhaps deceit. And when she spoke with the defendant, she learned that on the one hand, he told her that he completely blacked out after he saw the messages, the computer messages we spoke about. But on the other hand, he told her that the last thing he remembered was going to Stephen Walker's apartment to confront him. And based on that review, she determined that John Draft was not suffering from any mental disease or defect. Ladies and gentlemen, today you're going to hear a lot about direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. So to illustrate, direct evidence is when you watch snow fall on your lawn. Circumstantial evidence is when on a January night you go home and you go to sleep. And you wake up in the morning and you find a foot of snow on your lawn. Ladies and gentlemen, today you're not going to see a picture or a video of the defendant actually pulling the trigger and shooting Stephen Walker. But what you are going to see is evidence of a young daughter, an enraged father, and a loaded gun, and a life cut short at 22 years old because of the defendant's inability to control his emotions. So in a few hours, my co-counsel, Mr. Johnson, is going to get up here, and he's going to ask you to return the only verdict that makes sense in this case. He's going to ask you to do justice for Stephen Walker and return a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a difference between circumstantial evidence and no evidence.
And restart between witnesses.
And that's exactly what the state has. Our society believes in holding people accountable for the wrongs they commit. We believe that we want justice, and we want it fast. But our legal system does not allow for the state to prosecute and convict someone for a crime or a wrong they did not commit. That's exactly what the state would have you do today. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will be clear that in no way is John Draft a killer, and in no way is he responsible for the death of Stephen Walker. John Draft is a hardworking citizen of Armadillo. He's also a father. After attending Lone Star A&M, he worked in construction for 10 years and then started his own business right here in Armadillo. John is a caring, loving father. He has a daughter named Sally, who he loves more than anything. At age 12, John divorced his wife. From that point on, it was Sally who elected, at 12 years old, to live with John. John obtained sole custody, was a single parent, raising his daughter, and continued doing so all while running his own business right here in Armadillo. On May 13th, 2011, being the protective father that John Drath is, John Drath saw his daughter, Sally, walking hand in hand with Stephen Walker. Like any good and self-respecting father would, he became suspicious and concerned. As he had done in the past, he accessed Sally's social media accounts, and he did find messages that indicated a potential racy relationship between Stephen Walker and Sally Drath. Seeing evidence for the first time that his baby girl was growing up way too fast. He was shocked. He felt sick. He felt nauseous, dizzy. He fell to the ground and was knocked unconscious. 8 days later, John Drath wakes up on the cold floor of a jail cell. Should John Drath testify today, you'll hear him explain this. You'll also hear from Dr. Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson spent numerous hours with John Drath conducting a battery of tests to evaluate John Drath. Ultimately, Dr. Johnson will show you evidence that John Drath did not kill Stephen Walker. You'll also hear from the state. You'll hear from them first. The evidence that the state will put on is based on an incomplete investigation, lacking evidence. You'll first hear from Detective Stockard. And yes, Detective Stockard will tell you everything that he did at the scene of the crime. You'll also hear evidence of the fact that Detective Stockard failed to follow up on leads and to consider all the evidence presented to him. Additionally, you'll hear from Dr. Shikona. Dr. Shikona also performed a psychiatric evaluation on John Drath. However, in comparison to the work that Dr. Johnson did, his thoroughness, his preparation, his methods, and his techniques paled in comparison to the work that Dr. Johnson did.
Objection. Argument.
Your Honor, I'm simply responding to counsel's opening statements, which are predicated on similar grounds.
Repeat your objection.
Argumentative. Comparing the value of the witnesses and saying whose investigation pales in comparison to somebody else.
Counsel, you can perhaps compare hours put in, opposed to who did a better or more thorough job.
Certainly, Your Honor. When you consider Dr. Shikona's testimony, consider the lack of time that Dr. Shikona spent with the defendant, John Drath, in comparison to the numerous hours and amount of testing that Dr. Johnson did with John. Now, at the close of trial, my co-counsel, Ryan Wahlberg, will come to you and ask for you to return a verdict that justice requires. We are all deeply saddened by the untimely death of Stephen Walker and the person or people that caused Stephen Walker's death should be brought to justice. But the evidence will show, based on what you will see today, that that person is not John Drath. John Drath is not a killer. Thank you very much.